Hello.
This is Mike Leigh to talk to Dean Treadway.
Hey. Hello, Mr. Leigh. How are you?
Are you Dean Treadway?
I am indeed.
Good. Okay, good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Well, Mr. Leigh, first of all, I just wanted to tell you, it's been a tremendous honor to be speaking with you. We met at the New York Film Festival earlier this year, and I'm glad that you could make some time to join us and our fans on the show. Can you remember the first time that you encountered a William Turner painting in person and your impressions of his work? And also, how did that lead into wanting to make a film about his life?
The funny thing is, I've been thinking about it quite a lot lately, having made the film. I actually think when I was a teenager, Turner really wasn't on my radar. I think probably vaguely thought it was boring landscapes. So I could have told, when I was 14, I could have told you all about Picasso and, Impressionists and things. But when I was an art student in the early 60s in London, I discovered Turner, and like everybody, I fell in love with his paintings. I can't remember the exact single moment, but certainly throughout the years that followed, I became, more and more of a fan until the late 90s, when it occurred to me suddenly that there might be a movie in it. And once I started looking into Turner, the character, that this complicated guy who created all this extraordinary epic stuff, was a really interesting subject.
Last night I was watching Topsy Turvy, for probably the 10th time, and I realized that there's a certain sort of connection, not just in the period, but also in the subject matters or the characters in the piece, in which Gilbert and Sullivan share something with Turner in that they're quintessential British artists, but they're also and well respected, but also somewhat derided at times. Do you find an affinity with that? With that particular angle?
I think so. I mean, of course, the huge difference between Gilbert and Sullivan, great as their work is, and Turner, is that because both films are about people like we who make movies, who go to hell and back and slave away to create stuff for the general public. I mean, the difference is that Gilbert and Sullivan took profoundly seriously the job of creating something that was profoundly trivial. Mm-hmm. And Turner, of course, took profoundly seriously the job of creating something that was profoundly profound, really. That's the difference.
Yeah. Well, let's get on to Timothy Spall. I mean, I know that you had pretty much settled on him as Turner very early on. You gave him, 2 years' notice to get prepared for this role? Well,
yes. I mean, we sort of... But the point when we decided that we would actually go ahead and do it, because we'd been talking about it for some considerable time, I just suggested to him that probably it would be a good idea to do some painting lessons, and he agreed. And that took about 2 years, yes.
And he got to the point where he could actually, he actually reproduced a Turner.
Yes. I mean, the real point wasn't so much that, but that when we film it, he actually looks like he's really doing it,
Right.
But we didn't turn him into a Turner, really.
Well, I know that at the festival he said he was putting away the brushes for a while, maybe forever.
Yeah. He's very good at acting, though.
Yes, he is quite wonderful in the movie. What kind of research went into finding his voice and finding, the way that he walked? In
the first place, lots of people described Turner. There are lots of descriptions of him from the time. We gather that he made funny noises. We gather that at times he could be very taciturn and incommunicative, but at other times he could be very eloquent. That's often his language would be full of classical references. He could be very funny. And all of those things are there in the considerable characterization work that Tim and I colluded to make happen.
I'm interested also in your method of work is, justifiably famous, with the, extensive improvisations and so forth leading up to the crafting of the script and so forth. I wonder how doing a period film, with this sort of dialogue, of the period, how does that affect the improvisation part of?
Well, the point about the improvisation stuff is it's not a thing where people walking off the street on day one and just do it. I mean, it takes a lot of preparation to get around to a point when they can get into character and start improvising. And, of course, the research that everybody does, not least the actors, includes not just stuff about painting or whatever it is, but all sorts of things. Like, for example, Tim Spall he's read a lot of Dickens. And a lot of them have. These actors that I work with, they're very, they're not stupid actors. They're very sophisticated, intelligent people. So, if you get into the 19th century and you read newspapers and you read descriptions of things and novels and stuff, it gets into your bloodstream and you start to understand how people talked, and so that they make a very good stab when they're improvising at doing it in 19th century language. But in the end, when it comes to the crunch, and we finally construct a script through the rehearsal, exactly what gets said, then obviously my job as writer is to get in there and to refine it and make sure that there aren't any anachronisms or mistakes or howlers.
Right. The look of the film, of course, with Dick Pope's photography, who you've worked with Dick Pope almost your entire career, I know.
Yep.
But this particular work, I'm wondering, are there a lot of shots that sort of try to recreate Turner's vision?
Well, here and there are very few times we actually are referencing a specific painting. But, of course, the idea was and is, and I think it's worked brilliantly because Dick is something of a genius, really, is that the whole thing is informed by a sense of Turner. So, right from the beginning, there are shots where you think, wow, this is a Turner, but it's not actually a reproduction of a particular Turner. It just feels like a Turner. It gets the essence of what of sort of Turnerishness,
Right. I mean, the color schemes and so forth. I mean, after seeing the film, I went and researched the paintings and so forth, because I'm a painter myself, and it is an extraordinary vision of his work through the photography. I'm curious. I know this is a higher budgeted piece than you're used to. You spend a lot of time, getting the money to do this. Is there a lot more pressure? Do you feel a lot more pressure on you when doing a piece of this magnitude as opposed to something like All or Nothing, which is a cheaper film to do?
No, absolutely not. There's no difference whatever. You don't think about that. The job is to make a thing which is as perfect as possible, no matter what it costs. Actually, the truth of the matter is that Mr. Turner cost relatively little relative to what you would expect by looking at it. It was actually, in sterling, it was $8.5 million, which is actually, weirdly, only about $2 million more than it cost to make All or Nothing. Another year.
Topsy Turvy had a much higher budget. I'm surprised.
Well, it did, but then you see, it costs less to film a man walking across a mountain than it does to film 80 actors in a theatre with lots of lights and costumes and things,
Yeah, I was stunned also in watching Topsy Turvy last night. I never realized that almost all of that movie takes place in interiors. There's almost no exteriors whatsoever in that film.
Yes, I mean that's again it's a matter of cost. I mean, in the end, it sort of made sense. But when we were planning it, you were going to see Sullivan at the races, which he did a lot, and you were going to see Gilbert on his boat and all sorts of stuff. But we decided we couldn't afford it, and so just as we decided we couldn't afford to see Turner in Venice, which was a very important aspect of Turner's work. But, you've been to Venice probably. It costs a fortune to walk across San Marco and just buy a cup of coffee. So to go there with a film crew would have been more than singularly exorbitant, really.
I'm fascinated by your manner of work, of course. Do you feel like through the improvisations and so forth with your actors and the huge, I assume a huge camaraderie develops, that through that you reach that's how you reach the greater truths that are in all of your movies? I mean, when I watch your films, I seriously, I can't recall any other movies that take me to the places that your movies do emotionally. So I'm curious, is that the secret?
Well, yes. I mean, I've actually, since I have in the distant past as a student or a young filmmaker made films with scripts, but I've never made a proper film, in any way other than the way that you're talking about. And for me, it is all about, first of all, it's all about not being tied to a document that a whole lot of people have formed a committee to decide on every detail of the film before anybody shoots a frame. It is all about going out there and exploring and making a film up as you go along and investigating and experimenting and digging into the subtler depths of what people are about. So, I mean, it's the only way I know to make films, and I think there is no doubt, if I understand what you're saying properly, that there is no doubt a clear correlation between the way we make the films and the results we get. I mean, that's what it's all about. And that's why, go back to your previous question, the idea that a bigger budget puts more pressure on doesn't really arise. The same complete commitment and pressure to do something that's as perfect as possible is the same no matter what the budget or what the parameters of the story.
Mm-hmm. I know that you're, of course, a huge film fan, and do you still keep up with theater and film? Do you have time to do this?
Yeah. Oh, it's essential. It's absolutely. I get very irritated with filmmakers who say, I can't watch other films, it inhibits me, it's like writers not reading books or
I know, that stuns me when I hear that from a director. You don't watch movies? That's crazy.
Well, apart from anything else, I mean, watching movies is the greatest of experience. What started you in the first place? Surely it was the excitement of sitting in the cinema, the lights go down, the curtains draw, and you see a movie. I mean, if you stop doing that, I mean, you're missing out on your number one passion. I don't really understand it at all, really.
Yeah. What do you think about the current state of movies? Not just worldwide, but also just in Britain as well. But
the truth of the matter is, I do actually see, I see it in worldwide terms because, so far as I'm concerned, it's all about world cinema, and of which I feel very much part of. I mean, I do think there are two separate cinemas in the world. There's world cinema and there's Hollywood.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I'm constantly deriding Hollywood on this show. I don't understand what they're doing except trying to make money, which I think is sad.
Exactly.
Can you? I know that 400 Blows is one of your favorite films, but can you talk about some of your other influences? I mean, for instance, are you heavily influenced at all by the sort of the kitchen sink dramas that came out in the 50s and 60s? Tony Richardson and so forth.
You know what? I'll tell you the truth. I always thought it was a certain inspiration in those films, but I don't know whether I was influenced by them really, because I grew up in the industrial north in Manchester, and so when those films started, of course, it was great to see films for the first time that were about the world that I actually knew. But in fact, those films mostly are rather stagey, and all of them are adaptations of novels or plays. Mm-hmm. Now, when they were happening, so was the Nouvelle Vague, French movies of Godard,
right,
Truffaut, and so. And of course, so were all sorts of other things, including John Cassavetes' early films. Mm-hmm. And there were all sorts of stuff. I mean, I never saw a film that wasn't in English until I was 17. I only saw British and American films in Manchester. When I went to London to be a drama student in 1960, it blew my mind, because suddenly I discovered all this stuff that was happening all around the world, and it was so I was really influenced by all sorts of things. Specifically, of course, you could talk about Renoir, you talk about Ozu and Kurosawa, you could talk about the Italian neorealists, but actually there was all sorts of stuff that fed into my that influenced me in one way or another. And of course, there are Hollywood movies in the great tradition that are, great filmmakers. It shouldn't be forgotten. We shouldn't completely castigate Hollywood all the way back to its beginnings, because that will be...
Oh, of course not. I mean, because, Hollywood was working a lot better back in the 40s and the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
No question. And earlier than that. Earlier than that, actually.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. I mean, it seems like when the studio heads had tighter control over things, that there was somehow strangely more freedom in storytelling back then.
Yeah.
So it seems like a dichotomous kind of idea, but that's how it worked out.
Also, the other thing, of course, is that you're talking to me about the way I operate, the way I do things with the actors and everybody. I mean, the thing about going out there and saying, okay, what should we make up today, existed long ago in the movies, because that's how movies were made before the talkies came in. Mm-hmm. That's what Keaton and Chaplin and W. Griffiths and Foyard in France, they say, okay, what should we do today?
Mm-hmm.
They made it up.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to, when I studied film at NYU and so forth, was making movies there. I go back, sometimes I try and look at movies in that way, to say, wow, they're making things up, they're just like we did, with our 3-minute movies, on the streets of New York and so forth. So, when you remind yourself of that as a film viewer, if you have any kind of experience making movies, even just 8mm movies or whatever, it feels like you get more of an affinity with the filmmaker and with the cast and so forth.
Yes, I mean, it would be wrong for us to say anything that would suggest that no good films are ever made with a script in a conventional way, because that would be ridiculous.
Yes.
But the truth is, to do anything you can to explore and to experiment and to be fresh and for it to be real and to be truthful and all those things is worth it.
Well, my final question is this. I was listening to the commentary on Life is Sweet, which is still one of my favorite of your works. I think because it's the first work of yours that I saw, and it was kind of my introduction into your world. And I was surprised that you said at the end of the commentary that it wasn't one of your favorite movies. I mean, you still have an affinity for it, but it's not one of your favorite movies, of your own movies. And I'm curious, what is your favorite of your own films?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, I've got a particular soft spot for certain films, like Vera Drake being one of them. Meantime is another. And, but in the end, they're like one's children, I mean, I don't really favoritize them, really. And I shouldn't say that about Life is Sweet, but it's, for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure what the reason is, it is true that it's probably one I wouldn't necessarily take with if there wasn't room in the car.
Well, I want to tell you, you're absolutely my favorite filmmaker that's working now, and you have been for some time, and I consider it a tremendous honor to talk to you, and I wish you luck in the future. I can't wait to see your next movie, as always,
okay.
and I hope to see you again in New York, and thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye now.